Hi everyone, happy Earth Day and welcome to Night School. I'm Lynn
And I'm Christina. Welcome.
and we're part of the nightlife team at Cal Academy in San Francisco. For those of you who are joining us who are new, Nightlife is our weekly Thursday night events where we mix science with some creatures, cocktails, music, and more. Night School is our at-home virtual version where we bring you some fun, informal classes with a little nightlife flair. Before we get into tonight's program, we just want to take a moment to share some sad news that we received this week about one of our past Night School presenters, Kalapa Baibayan, who was a featured speaker on our program about celestial wayfinding last August, passed away a couple weeks ago. It was such a joy for Christina and I to work with him, and we're so glad to have had the opportunity to have had him on Night School. We know that a few of you have been watching with us for quite some time, so we just wanted to have a moment to share this news with you. If you'd like to learn more about him, his legacy, or watch his Night School segment, we'll drop some links in the chat box. I know I say this quite often, but it has been a tough week and a tough year. So everyone, please continue to stay safe and take care of each other. And now I will awkwardly transition back to tonight's programming. Today is Earth Day, and we are zooming in on projects at the zip code level. So we've invited some incredible individuals who are radically changing the health of the environment and their communities.
And so first up, we have Elizabeth Hiroyasu, who's a landscape scientist at the Nature Conservancy of California. And she's going to be talking about her work on a cool a Southern California version of the Bay Area Greenprint. And a Greenprint is a planning tool for land developers that reveals the benefits of how natural resources contribute to the local and regional community, ecosystem, and economy. So she'll talk about how to use that and her work on it. Next up, we have Dr. Monica Ramirez Andreatta, who's an assistant professor at the University of Arizona. She's also the director of a really amazing community science project called Project Harvest. This project is pretty ambitious. It has a goal, nothing short of structural change within the city. It's a project that works with residents living near contaminated sites to monitor their own harvested rainwater, soil, and plants, and aims to help these community members take better care of themselves, their families, and their environment. And then finally, we're going local again to an Oakland-based organization called Planting Justice, which addresses structural inequalities within the food system. Ashley Yates is their media director, and she's going to be joining us to give us an overview of the organization's work, which includes programs that create green jobs, provide ecological benefits, offer a holistic reentry from prison, and ultimately heals the communities most affected by unequal access to affordable food, dignified jobs, and green space. So stay tuned.
As part of the Academy's larger Earth Day celebrations, you're also invited to a virtual after party immediately following Night School. You can visit our African penguin colony, get a tour of the universe, and there'll be a DJ set by Chromeo. So stay tuned after Night School if you want to join the after party. As always, tonight's program is live, so say hi, let us know where you're watching from. We always like to see if it's your first time joining or if you're a Night School regular, so let us know. We'll have Q&As after everyone's talk, so make sure to add any questions you have in the chat or comment box, and we'll turn it over to Elizabeth now.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much to Cal Academy and to, for inviting me. And I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really excited to see all of the talks tonight. So thanks so much for coming. I'm Elizabeth Hiroyasu. I'm a landscape scientist with the Nature Conservancy. I'm based in Los Angeles, California, on the traditional territories of the Tataviam and Tongva people. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some conservation tools that can really work to highlight the intersection of people and nature. And before I forget, happy Earth Day to everybody. If you are like me and think a lot about conservation and nature, Earth Day's every day, but I think it's really fun that we set aside a time to really celebrate and remember all of the cool reasons why that make Earth amazing. So just first, a little bit of background about the Nature Conservancy. This is our mission, which is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And so we really evolved into an organization that focuses on not just preserving spaces, but really making sure that we are conserving areas that both endangered species or charismatic species, but also lands and waters that humans rely on in order to live and enrich our lives. These are our 4 key priority areas. So this is really what guides the Nature Conservancy in our work. We have a lot of strategies focused on tackling climate change, on protecting lands and waters, on providing food and water sustainably, and then finally on building healthy cities. And that's really the strategy that I'm going to be zooming on today, is this building healthy cities. And so here at the Nature Conservancy, we think about nature as being really integral to our cities and in order to make them more livable, sustainable, and equitable. And so we think that nature can be a really important tool in not just being out in national parks or places like that, but also in our urban centers that we think a lot about. So like I alluded to, we often think about nature as being over there, as being, this is a photo from Yosemite National Park, but we often think about nature as being far away and something as separate from us. But if you actually think about it, nature is all around us. And even in these like really urban places that we think of, like Los Angeles, there's still actually a lot of nature in Los Angeles. And so this is the LA River. And this might not be what you would traditionally consider to be nature or natural resources, but the LA River can have some really important opportunities for biodiversity and for connecting people with nature. And just to illustrate that, I pulled this, what looks like, I don't know, chicken pox on a map picture from iNaturalist today. And this is actually, you can kind of see the Southern California Bight. And this is the greater Los Angeles area. And all of these orange dots are actually iNaturalist observations. So the citizen science app where individuals can use their phones or tablets to record observations of, I think, bugs or animals or plants that they see. And so as you can see from the density of dots on this map, nature really is all around us. And so even in places like downtown Los Angeles, which we often don't think of as being important centers for nature, there's still quite a bit of nature in our urban centers. So despite that, when we start thinking about planning our cities, when we start thinking about planning with nature in mind, there's a lot of barriers to including that information. And so there's this real lack of easy and usable data to access, although that's getting easier every day. There's a lot of really limited metrics in planning tools. So this, how we communicate nature and what nature is and communicate about that data is really challenging and making that digestible and understandable to people. And then finally, including this kind of information requires a lot of community engagement in both our tools and our planning. So in the creation of our tools, because it's important to know what's important to people, what's important to communities, and what resources are really needed. And so you really need all 3 of these things in order to be able to plan with natural resources in mind. And so here at the Nature Conservancy, that is something that we are trying to tackle, and we're trying to find ways to incorporate nature into planning processes so that nature isn't seen as something that's just far and away and over there and only in our national parks or places like that, but actually is something that's all around us that can help address a lot of the issues that we're facing in our urban centers. And so here's just some examples of tools that the Nature Conservancy has created. These are map-based tools. The one on the upper right is it's a tool that we're actually just working on finalizing the development of now on closing the urban tree cover inequities. And so really trying to identify places where there isn't enough urban tree canopy, where there aren't enough street trees. And that has a lot of benefits for nature through providing habitat for species, through providing biodiversity to different areas, but it also has a lot of benefits for people by reducing things like the urban heat island effect in really urban areas where there's a lot of impervious surface, or it can also help to reduce total temperatures and make areas more livable. And I know all of us have been kind of locked inside with COVID, and so having those green spaces as places of respite, even if it's just being able to walk down your street and see those green trees, can be really important for public health and mental health. So I want to zoom in to talk a little bit more specifically about Greenprints, which are a tool that I work on. And so Greenprints are just a strategic conservation plan or a tool, and they're meant to reveal a lot of different co-benefits on the landscape. And so they're typically focused on things like parks or open space and working lands. But as you'll see, they're really tailored to the place that they're made for. And this is just a map of all the different green prints that have been created in the US. And if you want to look at those specifically, you can go to greenprinthub.org. So like I alluded to, green prints occur on many different landscapes and scales. And so they can cover urban areas, they can cover agricultural areas, and they can cover, areas that we might not typically think of as including nature. But despite this, they have a lot of different commonalities. So their biggest focus are integrating nature into planning. So really being able to put nature on the map and integrate those resources into the way that we plan our cities or plan our communities or plan our regions. They have really user-centered designs, and so they're designed with the user in mind, and they're meant to be easy to use or intuitive, and we try to build in features that make them easier to use. They contain a lot of multi-benefit content, and so they can contain information about water, food production, air quality, biodiversity, or habitat connectivity. And so by doing that, we're able to reveal the multiple benefits that nature can provide to people. And finally, they address multi-sector users. And so some green prints are built for people who are working in agricultural and working lands and conservation. Some green prints that cover urban areas might include developers and transportation officials, but also agricultural producers in the process of creating those green prints. So they're really variable, but they do really are made with the user in mind. And a really important portion of the green print, I talked earlier about that lack of metrics. So that lack of being able to communicate data to something that's useful for planners to understand. And so one of the things that we work really hard to do in the green print is act as this bridge between people who are creating that data and doing really good research and bringing that information to practitioners in a way that they can understand. So an example of this is in the Bay Area Greenprint, and actually the Southern California Greenprint as well, is we look at these climate model projections of temperature. We know climate change is causing an increase in temperature over time, and we coupled that with a hydrologic model output about how water resources might be changing over time. And we bring those two things together to understand what's called climate water deficit. But what that translates to for practitioners is how much water are agricultural producers going to need to use to grow their crops in a certain area under these different climate scenarios. And so we're actually able to calculate that number and communicate to anybody using the tool. If you want to keep growing wine grapes on this property, you might have to find a way to get access to this additional amount of water in order to maintain that crop. And so in this way, we're able to take data that can seem abstract and translate that into something that's useful that planners can use on the ground in their planning for the future. So right now we're working on the Southern California Greenprint. It covers the entire Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, region. This is the largest metropolitan planning organization in the US, and we're working in partnership with SCAG to develop this Greenprint. So it covers Ventura, Los Angeles, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial counties. And that translates to about 19 million people and over 38,000 square miles. So it's a huge region that has 5 different ecotones and a lot of different competing interests across the landscape. And our goal with the Greenprint is to really be able to highlight the environmental and natural resources that occur across the SCAG region in order to reveal the co-benefits of conservation to both people and to nature. So the SoCal Greenprint is still under development, and we're still bringing it together. We're in the second year of a 2-year process, and so we're planning to launch officially at the end of the year. So I'm very sorry, but I don't have anything to show you from the SoCal Greenprint. But I did want to give you a quick demonstration of the Bay Area Greenprint, which was developed and released in, I think, about 2016, and is kind of serving as the inspiration and the launching point for the SoCal Greenprint. And so if you're interested, you can go to bayareagreenprint.org and you can create a Greenprint. And so this is what our landing page looks like. And the real power in the Greenprint is that you can actually do this thing called analyze and report. And so this is open to the public. It's free to anybody who's interested in going and seeing in the Bay Area what the natural resources look like. But we really focus this on planners. And so trying to build a tool where they could see where all the different conservation resources are available. And so one of the things that you can do in the Bay Area Greenprint is you can actually look at a specific place. And so I have done that for the California Academy of Sciences, which is within this little circle. And so using the Greenprint, you can look at all of these different kinds of information and kinds of data. And so if we just turn off all the layers and look at the San Francisco Peninsula, we can look at biodiversity. So where are there areas that are really rich in biodiversity? That means we might want to conserve those habitats. So this has prioritized habitats, but we know other things that are important for biodiversity. That includes habitat connectivity, and that includes areas that are important for mitigation. And so right here where Cal Academy of Sciences is probably a really important area to make sure we protect for biodiversity. But let's say I'm also interested in something like carbon and air quality. And so how much carbon stock is in this area? If there's a lot of carbon that's already stored here, we might not want to disturb that area because we don't want to be releasing that carbon into the atmosphere. So I could turn that all the way up, and we can see that there are places where there's a lot of carbon. So we include a lot of these different metrics and a lot of information that we've condensed down into something that we hope is useful. So if we come back to that biodiversity and habitat, we can see specific data sets related to things like priority lands or baylands, and we can see how much of that particular resource is in our project area, in our shape around the Cal Academy of Sciences. We can also start to understand how things like climate change might impact these important prioritized habitats and where there's opportunities to create more resilience to climate change. And so we've done this across a variety of different themes. Now, the SoCal Greenprint won't look exactly like this. We have a unique set of themes, and like I said at the top, Greenprints are really specific to the places that they're made. And so we're building a Greenprint specific to the needs of Southern Californians. And so, for example, one thing that's come up in Southern California is people have identified a real need to include resources related to equity and environmental justice. And so we will be including components of that into the SoCal Greenprint. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the ways that we can use these mapping tools to identify areas where there are important natural resources and where we can get really efficient conservation, where we can conserve multiple resources in a single place. And so I hope that you will play around with the Bay Area Greenprint and stay tuned for the SoCal Greenprint, which I've included the landing page for here. Thanks so much for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Lynn.
That's such a cool tool. I think Christina will add the link, but it's already, Jerem, I think, added the link to our comments. So if you want to check out the Bay Area Greenprint, the link is there. But Elizabeth, let's ask some questions. I'm just curious, how long did the Bay Area Greenprint take?
So I didn't work for the Nature Conservancy when they first started the Bay Area Greenprint, but I think it was about a 3-year process. So the SoCal Greenprint is a 2-year process. And we, had COVID hit right at the beginning of that process. And so we've tried to move forward as quickly and efficiently as possible, doing a lot of outreach in a time of COVID, which has been a new challenge, but I think in some ways allowed more people to participate in a way that I think is really, really good.
Yeah, I am very impressed at even just a 2-year project. I would have thought it would have taken a lot longer. One question that's here is, what's your main role in developing the Greenprint as a landscape scientist?
So one of my biggest roles for the SoCal Greenprint is I am helping to convene our technical advisory committee. So I am the cat herder of all of the other subject matter experts that we have asked to participate in this process. And so I don't do as much of, I'm not necessarily deciding on the individual layers that are going into the entire Greenprint, but I'm actually talking with a lot of scientists and trying to find ways to translate that information, to create those metrics and translate that information into something that's understandable and usable by planners. And so I've gotten to spend a lot of time digging into geographic data, which is really fun, and just looking at the ways that a lot of really great scientists have mapped information about natural resources. So that's most of my role.
Okay. How often does the data for the Greenprint need to be updated? And how do you envision planners using this plan?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As we all may know, tools are only as good as the data that support them. And so we anticipate that there will be regular updates to the Greenprint. The Bay Area Greenprint has been live, I think, since 2016, and they've already done, I think, 2 data updates. And so we plan to keep the data as up to date as possible, and will address new data needs as they come up. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, it's, do you envision that, how do you envision that planners use the Greenprint?
Yeah, so we are trying to build it for a variety of types of planners. So planners at all different geographic scales, whether that's town, city, county, or tribal planners, and as well as transportation planners that may span multiple jurisdictions, people like that. And so there's a few different ways that we can anticipate this being used. One of the ways that we are really hopeful that it's used is in things like general plan updates. So being able to identify areas that might be important for conservation, or where there's a lot of natural resources, like a high concentration of natural resources. And so the reason we make this publicly available and as accessible as possible, we don't monitor who's using it. We don't even make people log in to use it. But because we want people to be able to use this tool really easily. And so it will span that entire SCAG region, that entire Southern California region. And so if I'm a county planner in Ventura, I might, use the Greenprint to look at what's right on that county boundary between Ventura and Los Angeles County to make sure that, we're protecting natural resources that span multiple counties. So there isn't just like a line between those counties, because we know things like wildlife and biodiversity, they don't care about county boundaries.
Interesting. There's a couple questions just on like, do you know if there's any green prints for other states or other areas, and how can people ask for a green print in their city?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there are green prints happening actually all over the world. So there's a really cool green print that they just developed in Chicago that the Nature Conservancy was part of. The Trust for Public Land was really integral in creating green prints as we know them and galvanizing them. And they've done a lot of work all over the country. So I know there are some in I think there's one for Houston, there's one for Chennai, India, there's one, they're building one in Berlin right now. And so if this is something that's interesting to you and you think would really help you, like if you're a planner and you really want access to a green print, or even if you're just, you know, somebody who's interested in being able to see this data mapped in a way that is accessible to you, I would say, you know, you could reach out to your local Nature Conservancy chapter. We're in 70 different countries, I think. But you could also reach out to your local planning agencies or your local metropolitan planning organizations. So those organizations that are the umbrellas to the planning agencies, and tell them, hey, like I've seen this really cool tool and I think it would be really helpful in our area. You could also work with other conservation organizations to help start that process.
Great. Elizabeth, I think that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you are interested in learning more, check out the links in the chat.
Thanks so much,
Elizabeth. Up next, we'll have Monica.
All right, thank you all so very much. It's an honor to be here with the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, and it's great to be with all of you tonight. Happy Earth Day, Feliz Día del Mundo, or de la Tierra. I would like to acknowledge that University of Arizona, whereas on occupied Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui indigenous lands, and that the University of Arizona itself sits on original homelands of indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. Before I begin, I would like to dedicate this presentation to a community champion and colleague, Roy C. Chavez. Roy was dedicated to transforming the business as usual model that perpetuates the exploitation of ecosystem services and labor, and truly schooled me on the economics and inequitable distribution of resources. So I just want to acknowledge, and unfortunately we lost Mr. Chavez to COVID-19 in Superior, Arizona. A little bit about who I am as I start. So I would say I'm a transdisciplinary environmental health researcher striving for environmental justice and structural change. To do this work, I'm trained in environmental science and ecology and evolutionary biology. I have an art degree, specifically photographic arts, and have a minor. I did my PhD in art as a PhD student, or minor, sorry, in art as a PhD student, and then did a postdoc with a environmental sociologist, and then started my academic career in the Department of Health Sciences in the Boston area. But that's what I studied. I'm second generation Mexican-American living in the Arizona-Mexico border region. My Nana, Margarita, or Maggie, is in the upper right corner. And I'd like to acknowledge that I was born in Tucson, raised in the border region. I'm an athlete, pretty silly, and dedicated to the Southwest and my community. And the goal of my efforts, why I went to school for 20-some years, I count preschool in that, is to achieve environmental health and climate justice for all. And so here's a map of all federally designated cleanup sites. As you can see here, environmental contamination is prevalent. These are a subset of contaminated sites here. If we look at the U.S. General Accounting Office, they have estimated that 1 in 4 Americans live within 3 miles of a hazardous waste site. And so your zip code can be more important than your genetic code. This statement and this state of affairs is what fuels the work in my lab and of my students, because we see this as unjust, unfair, and avoidable. Because we know that because of this injustice, we're not able to achieve environmental justice. And we know that if we can achieve justice, we will reduce environmental health disparities, right? This understanding that there's differences in health outcomes that are closely linked with socioeconomic and environmental disadvantage, and that these inequalities are unnecessary, avoidable, and unjust. And so it's important to understand that there are fundamental and critical challenges that exist in environmental justice communities. So my research program and lab is dedicated to working with environmental justice communities and working to address environmental pollution. We recognize that there's a limits of epidemiology and public health, right? So sometimes these studies cannot adequately detect. Sometimes the statistics that are used are not able to capture the interrelated effects of culturally diverse and economically disadvantaged groups with toxic exposure. We also know that in these spaces, there will be a form of technical elitism, right? So we'll see that there'll be expert control over community concerns and observations, and there's not a recognition and value of the community voice and observation. And so here in this work, right, advocate and recognize that community members are expert in their own right, and these efforts should be community-based. We also know that while you're raising environmental and scientific and environmental health literacy, these can combat these expert biases that environmental justice and other communities might experience. So today, and what you might have heard already, is community science, right? It's community citizen science. There's other terms I'll introduce here, but this is in general involving members of the public in data collection, analysis, interpretation, and the steps of the scientific method that will support research and public engagement with science. And so there's been a variety of other terms that have been used across the literature to capture this spirit of democratizing science or participatory research. So we know that many environmental justice projects are motivated to prompt action for structural change. And so when I say structural change, I mean affecting macro and meso level determinants of health, right? Hitting those zoning policies, economic, political power, the built environment, and so forth. And so what I would advocate today is that you're intentional in your design. You use a co-created approach, and using Garden Roots and Project Harvest, which are two programs that I lead, I will take you through the steps in research and show the level of partnership and engagement and co-creation with communities that are affected by pollution. I also want to highlight, right, the founder and the of Creative Reaction Lab that came about in 2018 in response to police brutality and racial and health inequalities. And so they proposed the equity-centered community design, which shares some similarities, actually a good amount of similarities, with this participatory action research and participatory approaches. So just giving a shout out to Creative Reaction Lab here. So I know that you're in San Francisco right now, but imagine you live near resource extraction. So here's just some images of the sites and areas in which I work in Arizona. Here's a map just showing you, this is a map showing where Garden Roots, a co-created citizen science project, has been implemented. And so you can see the yellow areas. Here is a map of just graphically showing resource extraction. Here showing community members that are part of Project Harvest. And I'll go into the details of those two projects, but I just want to set the stage, right, that we have access to what's called the Toxic Release Inventory data set. The EPA has just done an amazing update. It's available now in Spanish, and this allows you to see facilities that are releasing contaminants of concern and in what media they're releasing them, and if they're treating them, doing any pollution prevention methods. And so here you can see there's 264 in Arizona. And so when we look at the communities that in Project Harvest specifically, we can see that we're in Dewey, Humboldt. These are bird's eye view to just show the impact, the land impact of these mining activities. And then the urban community, Tucson, where you can see these toxic release inventories in the city of Tucson limits. I want to highlight, when doing this type of work, community engaged, co-created citizen science, community science, it's critical to build partnerships. And so in one case with Dewey Humboldt, I've been working there since 2008. Tucson, I've been working with communities, particularly in southern metropolitan Tucson area, since 2006. And then we see these two mining communities, Hayden, Winkleman, and Glow, Miami, since 2016. So going through the steps, right? So very first thing is like choosing or defining that question for study. It is incredibly important that those research questions are derived from community, right? The community, you can do this through community needs assessments, attending community advisory boards. But the key here is you're listening. So Garden Roots started off with these questions. Are my soil safe? Can I consume vegetables from my garden? And if so, how much? Superior, very much about dust and air quality. And then Nevada County, California, very much driven by looking at whether there is an exposure to arsenic and cadmium through ingestion of soils, incidental soil ingestion, and plants grown in these areas, which is known as Gold Country, California. And with Project Harvest, community members were harvesting rainwater, right? We live in the arid, semi-arid Southwest. They're capturing rainwater to irrigate trees, to get more green canopy, like you just heard from the previous speaker. And so they started asking questions of like, what is the quality of this harvested rainwater? Could I use it for my garden and edible plants? And so we're like, that's a really good question. But right now, those are the ways that the questions came about. Just want to highlight engagement with these community champions. So in Dewey Humboldt, this started with a father and a community champion and former town mayor who worked incredibly hard with the Rose Etta Miller you see here to get this site on the national priorities list, so there would be federal funding to clean up this mine tailings waste. And so in this case, what Garden Roots started out with these questions that they had as well as others. And so this is the beginning of a partnership that started Garden Roots. When we look at the efforts for Project Harvest, here's one of the last copper smelters in the United States. And we see that this level of engagement truly started with working with the school district superintendent in the area and doing family science nights and in-class science activities. When we look at Superior, Arizona, this was again driven by Roy Chavez and fostered by a relationship with the Concerned Citizens and Retired Miners Coalition in this area. And then looking at Globe Miami, this was a very different way of a partnership developing, but this was where a community champion and museum director was like, hey, we think this project would be good, but you need to meet with the mine before you can work here. So that was a little awkward to do what they call it, the dog and pony show with the mine, but the mine gave me the blessing. But then ironically, the town museum is the home of a previously segregated school for Mexican-American children that wasn't desegregated until 1952. And so going into these spaces as a Mexican scientist and also recognizing the segregation that existed in rural Arizona can make this work challenging, but it's still critical and important to do to address these sources of pollution. And so when we're looking at this type of work, we're doing environmental monitoring, laboratory bioaccessibility studies. We're also talking and getting site-specific information from participants about what they eat and their gardening behavior and practices. And so here you can see graphically, we're looking at dust, water, soil, and plants, because we really want to refine and have a culturally informed exposure assessment. If we look at some of the plant data, because a lot of these communities are like, hey, can I grow my own food, right? Again, another great public health prevention of having local foods available to them. And so in this work, right, we don't have food standards for some of like arsenic and lead that we're looking at. And so, lead, we have it from the World Health Organization. That's a whole nother topic. But in this case, we'll look at Garden Roots data and compare it to what a participant or family member might be able to buy at a local grocery store. Just to show you a little bit of data, because I really want to just focus on methods with EJ communities, we can look at the bioconcentration factor. So this is showing the vegetables that participants are growing and how much cadmium is as a ratio in comparison to their soils. And so you can see that some are accumulating and even hyperaccumulating cadmium. And then with arsenic, we see that the majority are below the accumulating line, but they are uptaking some of these metals into the edible tissue. Going back to methods, I work closely with promotoras or community health educators. These community health leaders inform project design and processes. And so in addition to this, again, highlighting that we gather information and resources through this engagement. Here's again showing the activities in Superior. And then for Project Harvest, we work with 7 different promotoras who share similar backgrounds and experiences with the communities in which we work. And they're the liaison and the peer educator or trainer. In Project Harvest, we have a diverse set of participants, right? Over 50% low income, do not have a college degree, identify as a person of color, and 25% speak Spanish as their dominant language. When we look at the steps in research, designing data collection methods and collecting samples, here are just showing that community members are deciding where to take the soil samples, what vegetables to grow and or submit for analysis, and they're ensuring that where they're collecting the samples is of use to them and based on their practice. And so I've swiftly gone through this section here of community concern, working with community members and leaders or promotoras. And now just to summarize, looking at how to translate this information to then be of use and digestible to family members that are part of this work. And so a tremendous amount of time is spent on data sharing, right? And looking at disseminating the results and interpreting the data. And so when we work with, so participants want to see, right, a description of what we observe, concentrations, some type of analysis and comparison, is that high? Where did it come from? Where should I focus my efforts on? And very importantly, what should I do now that I have this data? And so do I need to have a intervention, stop using that water, not grow that plant, etc. And so just highlighting some of the activities from this work, we can see here that in one community is very much about how much could be consumed from their garden. And so it did a risk analysis on how much could be consumed of each vegetable. In another community, we very much focused on the estimated exposure from different routes. So here you can see dust compared to different vegetables grown in these areas and drinking water. And so a parent could look at this and quickly see if they were concerned about their exposure to arsenic for a child less than 6 years of age, they should really limit their consumption of that homegrown kale, which kudos if the kids are even eating kale, but we would need to talk about that to be extra prudent and safe. And then the exposure to lead, you can see, is dominated by that soil. In Project Harvest, we spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about how to frame and report the data back. We use currently available standards and advisories to inform how and to answer the question, can I continue to use this water? So participants are mainly using it for irrigation. And so, but they are also giving it to livestock and poultry. They might fill a swimming pool with it and so forth. And so we designed this, this is a user-informed final visualization. And so we've spent a good amount of time and we've documented the individual action right here. And so in this case, we presented solutions on how to properly prepare your garden to reduce the accumulation of arsenic in the edible portion and or lead. And we've also talked to community members about if their harvested rainwater is above a standard, what they should do. And so in this work, we've been able to demonstrate that changes in environmental health literacy and numeracy. We've been able to document that people are increasing their environmental health awareness. And with Garden Roots specifically, we've seen this level of community change. And so I kind of jumped right into some of the outcomes, but I just want to introduce the environmental health literacy framework of going from individual awareness and knowledge to skills and self-efficacy and to that community change, right? Action and exposure to protect health. And with Garden Roots, right, we have examples where we saw elevated levels of arsenic in the drinking water from the public utility. Community members notified other households as well as the state. And together we made sure that the state was aware, they resampled, that utility got a notice of violation and fine for exceeding the Safe Drinking Water Act. That water utility also had to report concentrations of arsenic in the town newsletter. Also had community members state agency attention, focus, another project in another community were showing that that the state agency needs to focus on residential soils again because their former remediation done by the responsible party in the area were not sufficient. As well as community members documenting fugitive dust emissions, and also with this level of documentation, the company in this case was issued a notice of violation. So we're seeing some action and community change to protect environmental health. So we're currently really working on observing what type of collective action might be taken and exploring ways to support community efforts. And we're in the midst of this right now with Project Harvest. And so I went through that at a pace that might have been a little quick. I drank some coffee before this to stay lit, but I want to thank you all. I'll thank to all the community researchers and students and all of you for listening to this presentation.
Hi, Monica. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's just such a, I mean, I want to show this. I hope lots and lots of people see this, because you outlined such a great way to like get communities involved, like step by step. So we're going to pass it around the wider academy, I think. Anyway, so I mean, it's really interesting because you talked about how you know, this really started with a community member. So how did your lab get involved with the project, and how can concerned community members kind of reach out and get the help of scientific partners?
Yeah, so great question. One of the biggest things was I went out and just listened. And so I think when I first, so there's a lot of things going on, but we have within some of these big grants, there's called research translation cores. And the goal of that core is to serve as the liaison between the science being generated and those the needed, right? The end users. And so one way of what, I was like, well, I'm going to go listen to what the end users are worried about or need. And so I attended town community meetings and just listened and took notes. And then when I, asked people with the vegetable question, I was like, that's so good. I don't have site-specific data, but would you be interested in working together? And that actually was my dissertation project. And they were like, sure, we'll work with you, but it took a couple years to get the funding. But in general, the way that occurs is you meet people where they are and you listen.
Yeah, great. And let's see, so some of the people you've worked with for, I think it was for Garden Roots, what are the numbers and percentages of those populations involved in your project that consume vegetables from family gardens?
Yeah, so the majority of participants that were in Garden Roots are regularly consuming. So when we asked them, so Project Harvest, it was a little bit less. I think it was like maybe 20% were from the garden, but for Garden Roots, because these are rural communities, or well, actually I'd have to go back, but it looked like it was a beach for Garden Roots a little bit higher, like 20 to 50%. But the biggest thing is that they grow a lot of certain crops and then they share it. And so that's one of these exciting activities with gardening in general, is like sharing this excellent, nice produce. And so they might not be 100% relying on it, but they're distributing it.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And so you talk about how some of the, some of your work, some of your work, like it prompted, like public utility stuff to issue warnings and do this other work. But how do you think this work might affect like future new policy changes? How will that fit in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with Project Harvest, right? So that Project Harvest is a really big team of people, and we just finished our now like 3 years worth of data collection with the community members, and so now we're doing our community-based data sharing, and then we're looking at it and applying some statistics for forecasting and modeling. And it's at that point we would do broad dissemination, and I really feel will inform the use of harvested rainwater within the state of Arizona and perhaps beyond. But the other things is one of the big things with Garden Roots was that EPA, when they were working at this in one community specifically, was not looking at local food consumption as an exposure pathway. And so the data generated from Garden Roots was able to feed into that exposure model to account for locally consumed food products. And so that's something we would like to see done and more consistently at hazardous waste sites.
What about like larger food production sites? Somebody mentioned that there's a large commercial winter vegetable production in southern Arizona. So how are those sites have you talked with them, or are you in cooperation with them regarding pollution in areas of concern?
Yeah, so great question. So I'm part of the cooperative extension. University of Arizona is a land grant university where we have cooperative extension specialists that work closely with large scale agriculture. And so they would be able to answer, they can talk a little bit about the nuances of those relationships. I can give the example that in 2016, 2017, a group of students and I we wanted to do a partnership with EPA for that toxic release inventory data set, and we received it. It was called like a university challenge. And what we were aiming to do was to map out toxic release sites and their proximity to organic and conventional farming to look at potential for pesticide and any type of drift. And so so we wrote that out, started the layout, and then when we started to work with farmers, it's very different. Even in the study in California, farmers are like, whoa. And like we tried to, so it's been challenging to build the rapport when you're talking about pollution or source of pollution with commercial farming. But I would say that I'm not an expert in working with commercial industries like some of my colleagues in my department who have done a really good job, for example, looking at E. coli and spinach, right, and E. coli in romaine and different leafy vegetables, particularly in the Yuma area.
Yeah. And finally, lots of people want to know a lot more. They're like, oh, the slides went by so fast and we want to read all of it. Is there a place online where people can just read more about these projects?
Yes, of course. So you're welcome to go to gardenroots.arizona.edu.
Okay.
And projectharvest.arizona.edu. And so so Garden Roots will have visualizations available to everyone, de-identified, no specific data points selected for the communities that have been part of Project Harvest so far. It'll also have the gardening best practices in English and Spanish, as well as links to peer-reviewed publications and other popularly written documents. And then Project Harvest, we still have password protected for the data because we're keeping it specific to participants, but we hope by the end of the summer it will be available to all. And we did a big geospatial representation of that data set. And so that's up and coming.
Okay, great. I quickly typed those up and dropped them in the chat. So people go visit. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is really inspiring, and good luck with all your future work. We'll be watching. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it, Christina.
Okay. And up next, we have Ashley Yates from Planting Justice.
Oh, hello. I am live. My name is Ashley Yates. I'm from Planting Justice. I'm really excited to be here. Glad that I've kind of gotten to hear a little bit of the conversations thus far. And I want to share with you all today just a little bit about our organization's work and how we're shifting our social economy in East Oakland with the work that we do. So let me get ready here and share this. Give me 1 second. It looks like it's. There we go. Okay. All right. So Planting Justice. One of our taglines is grow food, grow jobs, grow community. Pretty self-explanatory, but one of those things that keeps us really rooted in the work that we're doing. When we grow food, it's more than growing food, right? We are growing those jobs, and in turn, we're growing our community and trying to set forth a new example of what we see in the world. We are an organization that is anti-carceral. So, we believe that everything is political, even the food that we eat. And so we try to make sure that we're putting our politics into the things that we do rather than having them forced upon us. Our mission is to empower people most directly impacted by mass incarceration and other social inequities with the skills and resources to build food sovereignty, economic justice, and collective healing in our communities. That's definitely a mouthful. It's a mouthful for me to say, if you can't tell. But at the core, what it means is that we believe that by investing in people, investing in our communities, we can not only undo some of the most harmful structural harms in our communities, we can create entirely new systems, entirely separate from those old ways. And so we focus on, first and foremost, building food sovereignty, which you'll see later on why that's so important to us and kind of why we focus there. Acknowledging that we live in a capitalist society, building economic justice, because we recognize that without the resources to really have sovereignty, to have self-agency, it's really hard for our communities to get anything accomplished. And then, you know, this should probably be first, honestly, but collective healing. Collective healing is at the center. It is at the heart of everything we do at Planning Justice. And you'll see as I, go through this presentation that part of what we do, again, is shifting the idea of what a nursery can look like, shifting the idea of what a business can look like, shifting the idea of what a community can look like towards something that services us a little bit better, a lot better. So part of how we get there is we look at the root causes of the issues that we're trying to tackle and solve. A lot of times in activism, there's so many things, there's so many problems that we know are all interconnected. It begins to get really hard to know where to focus. And so we started PJ kind of with a power map of looking at what are the root causes of the health inequities, because again, if we're not healing, if we're not healthy, we can't do anything. And so you'll see here a vast amount of problems, right? The housing, segregation, income and employment disparities, educational disparities, transportation access, air quality, access to healthcare, criminal justice, and various people's experiences with that system and how they differ depending on, varying factors of your identity, state violence, which covers a breadth of things, social relationships and community capacity. And then you'll see right back in the middle, food access and liquor stores, which is a huge one for us. Because again, if you aren't healthy at your core, it's hard to address anything else, right? Like you can have housing, but if you're not healthy enough to live in it, what good does it serve you? If you're not healthy enough to get your education, you can't be, educated, you can't get the knowledge that you need. So again, all of these things are interconnected, but for us, the crux is really having control over what it is we put into our bodies, the fuel of us as humans, the fuel of us as living creatures, and then we can build out from there. You'll see here the results of those social inequities again, right? So we're talking about actual tangible results. This isn't theoretical harm. We can see a direct correlation between the lack in our communities and what it causes. And one of the ways that these harms come through and that we feel like we can address at PJ is through food again. So food for us is a healing tool, but we also have to acknowledge that throughout history, that hasn't always been how it's been used. And I won't go through them individually because I feel like that can get a little wordy, but you all can go through and read here and see the various ways that food has been used not to empower us, not as a healing source, not as a source of the fuel that we need for our social fights, right? But as a tool of oppression, as a tool of colonization, as something that, was meant to hold us down. And not only in the access to the food, but through very strategic strategies to deprive people of the basic necessity that we need. And so if we acknowledge that, we have to acknowledge that that's something that we need to work on too. And that's what PJ is all about, is reversing these patterns. Solutions. The problems are evident. We all know what's hurting us. We all understand and feel the weight of these systems. And if we don't, we know someone that does. We pay attention, we're thinking people. And so a lot of times we're able to name these problems. We're able to name that, the food is not present in our communities. We're able to name what the lack is in our communities. But for PJ, what we're focused on is not only pointing out those problems, but implementing the solutions. We know that you can't get anywhere until you actually implement the solutions. And so PJ was founded in 2009 by Gavin Raiders and Halle, who were anti-war activists, but at some point realized that you can only push against something so much until you have to build what you need. And so we talk about the problems because we have to diagnose them, but the solutions are really what we're focused on here. You see, the problems are well understood, but the tangible solutions that we need, not so much. And so what I want to talk about today is the way that PJ, as we call Planting Justice, is creating scalable, tangible models that have worked. We've been in existence for 10 years now. And so we have the evidence and the data to support that what we're doing is working, especially when we juxtapose it with the things that we know aren't, right? And the impact of those systems. Before I get into the breakdown of planting justice work, one of the things I want to talk about and really kind of focus on here is to understand our work. For us to understand our work, there's an ideology that we have to, study, and there's a pedagogy that doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of, examining the world, again, understanding these problems and moving towards what we want to shift into. And so when we're talking about economy and we're talking about ecology, both the same root word to mean home, right? We're talking about where it is we exist, where it is we live, and the processes through which we experience that world. And so you'll see here on the left, the extractive economy. That's what we're pretty used to. We're used to people taking from us as individuals. We're used to people taking from our communities. Capitalism is definitely an example of an extractive economy, right? Like it extracts from the people, it extracts our labor. And sometimes it gives us something back. And so oftentimes people don't view it as an extractive economy, but that really is what it is. If we look at the breakdown of it, the militarization, that's part of an extractive economy. The enclosure of wealth and power, I think we'd be hard pressed to argue that we don't experience that, especially in this country. And so we see these things are present, and we need to see what needs to be present in order for us to heal and to have and experience a different sort of eco, right? And so on the right, you have the regenerative economy. That's where PJ and our work really lies. That's what we move into. That's the center and the heart of our work. We, center cooperation, regeneration, caring and sacredness, ecological and our social well-being, right? Like that is built into our business model, our organization model. It's built into everything we do. And you'll see the governance also too, like a deep democracy, right? And all we mean by that is that everyone is accounted for to the fullest extent that we can, versus an extractive economy when you have this enclosure of the wealth and power, but also the ideas with that power. And so the way that we do that, the way that we make that shift, that PJ has made that shift, are through our various programs and our community work. Again, I say we've been in existence for a decade now. So I'll start from the very beginning with our three initial programs: our educational program, our Canvas program, and our Transform the Yard. All of these put us deep into the community, right face to face with the people that we're in service to, with the people that are in service to us, because this is a regenerative relationship, not an extractive one. We don't come into our communities to take, we come to give and to also receive and continue that. So with our education program, we're going directly into schools. We're going directly into facilities that house youth. And we're teaching them about the PJ model and food sovereignty and the food system, everything from how to grow that food all the way up into, how it moves through the system and it lands on our table, and showing the students that entire process so that they can really understand how and where they can intervene in that system that doesn't work for us. Our Canvas program is the same thing, a community-based program that reaches out into the community and makes them active participants and active donors in the work that we're doing. A lot of nonprofits operate solely on grants or largely on grants. We are lucky enough that people do like to fund our work through grants, but also a third of our funding comes from our Canvas program, which is fairly unusual. A third of our funding comes from small donations, and that's by design. You know, we are accountable to the people in more ways than one. And so by having a model through which their actual dollars are invested in us, it creates a different relationship where you're not held accountable to larger funders, right? But the people who have given you those direct dollars. Again, a shift in the economy that we're creating with planting justice, a shift in the economy that can be created, you know, within the East Bay, within Oakland, and again, hopefully scalable, and a model that can carry on. And then lastly, our third initial program is our Transform the Yard program. Again, trying out different models. This is a landscaping program based in permaculture practices, based in indigenous practices. And so that off top makes it different than other landscaping programs. We're not doing just what is profitable or what is beautiful. We actually have an intent and a goal of connecting the clients with the earth, of connecting them with these practices, or reconnecting people with these practices, and instilling that in each and every installation that we do. And so we use natural products. We make sure that we're not, you know, using heavy pesticides or, you know, just these kind of new, well, let me not say new, because permaculture is evolving all the time, but some of the more technologically advanced ways, right? But actually acknowledging that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The ways that we've been working with the earth for hundreds of years actually were regenerative, right? Versus the extractive ways in which companies are interacting with the earth now. And we've seen the impact of that. So we know we need to shift back or shift to something else. And so within the Transform Your Yard program, again, that is our focus. And another aspect that makes the Transform Your Yard program a different and new model from just your everyday landscaping project is that we build into it the justice of economy that we want to see. So what that means is here in Oakland, we live on a lonely land. We recognize that the entirety of the United States is stolen land. And we recognize that in knowing that, there's a responsibility and a duty we have to exert ourselves towards writing that when we can. And so in our Transform Your Yard program, when we have clients come in, they pay an optional SHUMI land tax, which is a voluntary tax that goes directly to indigenous folks and Loney folks. Through us, it goes to the Segorite Land Trust, which is a women-led urban indigenous land trust. They actually are in the process of becoming the owners of the land where our nursery sits. And so these are all new ways of being, right? Normally you would have the organization own the land, right? Right now that is the case, but within a year, we're actually transitioning and we will no longer be the owners of our own nursery. It will belong to the rightful people of that land, the indigenous folks. And so they will, you know, hopefully choose to remain in relationship with us and graciously allow us to continue our work on that land. But at the same time, they have the sovereignty to decide what they want to do with that land. And so again, that's, you know, something that's new. We talk about returning land back, but very rarely do you actually see it in practice. But here we are doing it. I'm actually going to skip this one, but or go over it briefly. I've kind of already said what our education program does. This is just an elongated explanation of what it is that we do. So I'll pause here for a second and let people read it, just in case people have questions at the end. But if you'll note here again, holistic wellness is noted. as a focus. Again, it's our through line in everything we do. We're concentrated on the healing. These are some pictures of our education program. People often, wonder where we are. We're, again, in McClymonds. We're in the community. So we're focused on doing the work right where we live, on making the change right where it is that we have our community, and expanding from there, going deep and then wide. Some more pictures, Fremont. These are pictures of our Transform Your Yard work. Some of our private clients, you'll see and you can note here the difference between a planting justice yard and, maybe someone whose intention is to be on the cover of Lawn and Garden or Home and Living or one of those, magazines, right? Like, we use native plants to the area. We use plants that, regenerate and work well with each other, with consciousness to, what helps each other grow and what's toxic to each other. So we're not just throwing things together. They're planted very intentionally. Again, a synopsis of the Canvas Grassroots program that I already went over here. And you can see it's a fairly new program for us, only in existence since 2012, but already really super impactful, already bringing in, a third of our operating budget, and we want to continue to grow that. We would love for this to be half of our budget and be less dependent on major funders. Again, shifting that relationship of who we're accountable to and who, is invested in us. And now I'll get into the bread and butter of our organization. At least for me, this is what brought me to work at PJ. All of the things that I've mentioned are, I think, really awesome. They're really revolutionary models and groundbreaking models. But where our work really shines to me, and where we're really shifting the economy, our local economy, in the greatest way, is in addressing the prison industrial complex. It's massive, right? Like, it has its tentacles throughout every single industry that we can think of. And so by focusing on the abolition, we know that we're reaching so many of the other issues that we talked about on that second slide, right? When we're looking at the food and liquor stores and the presence of food apartheid in our communities, when we're looking at the health disparities and the air quality, so much of this keys back into the carceral mindset, and who is prioritized and who is seen as a potential entry into this system, right? So you'll see here in California, again, sticking local, 7 out of 10 people released from incarceration go back in less than a year. That's 70% of people going back right back into this system. So either that's by design, or our attempts to keep people out of prison are miserably failing, right? You see that it's cost $65,000 a year to keep one person incarcerated. That's a very high price tag. It's higher than a lot of people make in a year. So again, where our priorities, we're looking at our investment, and we're looking at where our dollars are spent, knowing that's not working. What can we shift? The prison industrial complex is leaving us and our communities with massive trauma, massive consequences, not only for children, as you see here, but for all of the community members that are impacted. When one person goes to prison, it's not just that one person that goes to prison. Their family goes to prison, their loved ones go to prison, the people who care about them also experience that prison with them. So the trauma that is put on our communities, the violence that we suffer through the prison industrial complex, can't just be addressed with one person. We have to have a holistic way of looking at it and acknowledging the ripples that key out from this violence. The Ella Baker Center released a really excellent report showing the impact and the cost that extend beyond just the person that's incarcerated. And so when we think about solutions, we also think about how we address that widespread harm. Instead of just targeting, one point, we want to make sure that we're addressing as much as possible. including, scarce job opportunities. We know that once you are convicted of a crime, once you are slapped with a certain label, it is almost impossible to find a job. What that means is that 7 out of 10 people are going right back. If you can't feed yourself, if you, can't have self-agency, you're very quickly, made vulnerable for a host of reasons. And so recognizing that violence and those impacts, again, are housed in just more than putting someone behind bars. They're housed in all of these different kind of squeeze points where the violence is enacted, and we have to address all of them. And so the way that PJ does that is through our reentry program. This is, again, shifting the pattern, right? The pattern that we currently have says, once you go to prison, you're 70% likely to go right back in that year. We don't believe that that has to be the case. Not only do we not believe that that has to be the case, we have 10 years of evidence that show that it doesn't, that it doesn't have to be the case. We've succeeded here. And so you'll see in the box here, we have changing California's 65 recidivism rate is 100% possible. We say that, again, not in theory, not as an aspiration or as a dream, but because we have a model that we know is scalable, that we have scaled over the past 10 years, that shows us that people, once you provide them with the things that they need, are much less likely to go back into prison. It's not that people are choosing, it's that they're made vulnerable by the lack of support that exists once they come out. And so our 5 keys to maintaining our success rate in this program are, number 1, we start on the inside. There is a huge separation between prison and the outside. And in reality, that's just a wall. You don't tuck someone behind bars and they stop being a person. They're still a person. And so we know that we have to break down those barriers. Asada Shakur said a wall is just a wall. It can be broken down. And so we start with that mentality. We work directly with some of the most, to be honest, heinous institutions and prisons to make sure that we have access to the people that we want to help. So we start on the inside, breaking down that idea of the fact that we live in separate economies, because we don't. Those are still our community members, even though you've tucked them away. Number 2, we give a living wage job. Again, sovereignty, focusing on building sovereignty and knowing that without agency, nothing is really possible. And with agency, almost everything is possible. So we start off with a living wage job. We make sure that we are not only well above minimum wage, but that we account for the current cost of living in Oakland, and we really try to maintain a living wage for all of the people that come to work at PJ, but specifically those involved in our holistic reentry program. Number 3, we do peer support. We make sure that those people are partnered with someone. A lot of people would use the term case manager. We like to use the term community navigator. They're put directly with someone who can help them guide them through the systems that they are, most likely unfamiliar with now because they don't exist in prison. We don't leave people to fend for themselves. We acknowledge that community is the way we get through, and we make sure that that's baked in to our employment, which again is an entirely different new model. Number 4, we prioritize health, healing. I can't stress that enough. We can, talk about it. I hope people have questions about it, but by prioritizing health, that is another shift towards a different economy, towards a different way of being, creating an entirely different possibility for folks than when we don't, right? Than when we focus on productivity, than when we focus on, other kind of measurable numbers versus the well-being of that person. And then our number 5 key is making sure that there's meaningful opportunities to work and advance. So we make sure that people aren't just stuck in the same position, especially recognizing the trauma of prison. The reality is you're literally stuck. You're literally physically stuck in a place. And so again, shifting that, what can we do to open, to expand? So we make sure that there are pathways towards, advancing not only within PJ, but whatever work that they may want to do, and really seeing PJ as a support system before anything else, a place where they can come and, heal while working, not work while they're healing. And I'll finish up. These are just some more slides of our work. You'll see here, we work with the Insight Garden program that I mentioned, which is directly in San Quentin. These are some of the guys and some of the gardens that we have been able to build. I will not stress how difficult it is to get a prison to agree to let you build a garden, but it is not easy work. And so we're very proud of the fact that we are able to do this, to be in partnership, and to bring this healing access to land and nature to folks that are behind prisons and are behind bars. And you'll see here, there's not much grass, right? There's not much, there's not trees, there's not land, it's just concrete. And so a lot of times when we bring these gardens in, we are bringing the greenery with us. There is nothing else there that's living aside from the people in these institutions. I think I'm gonna do a time check. These are our newer programs, but I want to see if I can show you all a short video on one of our newest projects that will kind of summarize this. So I'll let people read over this briefly, but again, in keeping in line with the work, we're just growing out these models, growing out these different opportunities for us to show up and engage with the community in a different way that isn't based in just profit, but is based in collective healing. And by doing so, hopefully we can heal our entire community. And I think we've shown that by having this model, it, the same way that the harm from prisons and these harmful extractive economies ripple out, they also ripple out when we create something new, when we create something regenerative. So I want to continue to do that. And Lynn, if I could check in, these are just pictures. Can you share the video of our newest project? And I'll come back and summarize very quickly because I think I'm maybe over time. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'm so excited about that video. It's brand new. Thank you so much, Lynn, for squeezing it in. We just closed escrow on that property at the end of March. It is right next door to our current nursery, which is at 319 105th Avenue for anyone that is local and in Oakland. And as you saw in the video, that property is going to become the first of its kind, an aquaponics farm, deep in the middle of East Oakland, in a community that has no grocery stores, that has no banking institutions, that is a food desert, experiencing a food apartheid to levels that are extraordinary. And so that is a perfect example of the projects that Planting Justice has in motion that are shifting, again, those economies that we live in. We recognize that we are part of the economy. You know, a lot of times we talk about Earth as separate from ourselves, but at PJ, we recognize that we are part of the natural world as well. And so we need to be just as in order as these things. And so with this program, or with the project that I just shared with you all, that new video, it's just massively exciting because, like I said, it's the first of its kind. It's in an area where it's not supposed to be, and it's carrying on the tradition of that land in a way that honors the history, but that also offers something new to the future. And so one of our projects in El Sobrante was going to get turned into a gas station. And we really rallied with the community to say, you know what, we don't need another gas station. What we do need, right, is a plant nursery. What we do need is a place where people can come and buy fresh food, buy fresh vegetables, where they can learn about how to grow these things themselves. And so by presenting the new narrative for what we needed in that community, we were able to get that farm out in El Sobrante, and we were also able to get this one in Oakland, again, by presenting a new narrative, right? People had all types of ideas of what this could become, a parking lot, another retail store. But again, we intervened, imagined something new, and said what we don't need in our economy, what we don't need in our ecological system, in our neighborhood, in our community, is another extractive entity. We need something regenerative, right? We need an aquaponics farm. And so we're so excited about that. We are cleaning it up as we speak, day to day. If you go to plantingjustice.org and you're interested, you can definitely volunteer to sign up and kind of get a firsthand view for what that project is, you know, going to become. And you can see in the video, it's not much right now. It's very run down. It's old. It was abandoned, but we are so excited to get to breathe new life into that and have it be a site that houses and continues on the work that we're doing to shift into creating the world that we need. So I will end there, and I think we're going to do a couple of minutes of questions, but definitely thank you all for listening to me speak. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I definitely get some waggles for that. So I hope that, you know, everyone was able to kind of follow along and I didn't run through things too quickly.
Hi, Ashley. I don't think you were talking too fast. I loved so much of what you said. And we don't have too much time, but I do want to ask a couple of questions. First off, I am really excited for your project and congrats on that. I'm excited to see where it goes. The first question is, how do you envision translating the high school and prison curriculum to something other orgs can use themselves? Is it something that's doable?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We actually have, Lord, something like over a dozen modules built out in our Plant Cook Organize, is the name of it, curriculum. And we are in the process right now of digitizing that curriculum. And so our idea is to, you know, have it open source in the sense where anyone can log in to Planting Justice. They can download the lessons, they can learn, you know, by themselves and go step by step, or have a teacher go step by step. And so, yeah, that is the plan. We definitely like at the moment, we have the capacity to be able to kind of print certain lessons out and share them with people. But the big step is moving towards digitizing the entire thing and just letting people have their access directly. With the prisons, it can be a little tricky, I will say that, because they vary from institution to institution with what they allow. And sometimes it's just completely nonsensical. So you have to navigate within those strange prison rules. And so often it's case by case, but we definitely try to get it into the hands of as many people as possible.
Great. I know you kind of grazed over this, but how can people help? How can people get involved?
I got so many ways. So first and foremost, you know, plantingjustice.org. We, you know, as I talked about, we need money to sustain this work. And so we prefer to be in community with our community in that way, getting small, you know, donors and funders. So You can always, give your dollars, but we also are desperately always in need of volunteers. This is a land working organization. And so if you're willing to come and get your hands dirty a little bit, stand out under the sun, breathe some fresh air, we always welcome volunteers to our East Oakland nursery and our new farm in El Sobrante, which is, I think, about 20 minutes away from Oakland. So if you have a car, you can drive there as well. But those are the two main ways to help is, hands-on and offering those dollars.
And I know you talked about the aquaponics project, but last question, how do you have other plans for the future or any plans for scaling up?
Oh, Lynn, that is such a tricky question. Yes. So it feels hard to condense all of this into,
Right.
30 seconds or so, but the aquaponics farm is a huge project, and that's right next door to our nursery that we've been operating and using as our physical space for the last 6 years. But we also have this project that I've mentioned a couple of times out in El Sobrante, our 4-acre mother farm. That is not only a farm, we also acquired the land to put a sliding scale cafe and a community healing space in partnership with a church that is named the Good Table out there. The joint venture is also going to be called the Good Table. So if you go to our website, we're going to have the information up on that pretty soon, but it's a project, like I said, called the Good Table. It's going to be a nursery, a sliding scale cafe. We're going to take herbs right from the farm in El Sobrante to a commercial kitchen that will be in this space, and we'll be making, various honeys and herbal remedies that people can then purchase and take right on home. So it's really going to be a space of creativity, an open space of healing, and hopefully a place where people can, come engage with the products, the plants that we sell, and learn a little bit more about them.
That sounds amazing. Well, wish we had more time, but thank you so much, Ashley, for joining, and thanks for all the work that you're doing for the community. It's really inspiring.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. I'm going to bring back Christina so we can close out the show. Hi. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Happy Earth Day again. And thank you, Elizabeth, Monica, and Ashley for sharing all your knowledge tonight. Next week, we'll be exploring geology and society. So explore how human activities impact the Earth's structure and consider how geologic features are linked to the culture of local communities. So come back next week.
Yes, please do that. Yeah, and again, thanks again. This is such I think I was so inspired by our speakers. So please share this link far and wide, because I think there's really important things for lots of people to learn from it. But anyway, yeah, and subscribe. We're back next week. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. And actually right now, we told you at the beginning of this program about an after party from the Academy's other live stream tonight. So it's still going. So I'm going to drop a link to the YouTube stream in the chat if you want to go over there and see some people DJing in front of penguins and other things. And you get a peek inside the Academy that, has been closed for most of the last year. So thank you again so much. Happy Earth Day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.